Here's my script. Could you read it?
Okay, yeah, and move that
Let's
script
edit
over
this
here.
part
Yeah,
out.
okay.
Going 10-1.
Rain dance, sun dance, con.
Let's do this.
You guys ready?
Quiet Thank you
on
so
set.
much for this award. Ready and action. Welcome back to Mel Moment Mondays. I'm your host, Mel, and today I'm joined by a climber and adventure photographer whose work has been seen on the covers of Climbing Magazine and much more. Welcome, Rob Kepley. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm
Yeah.
honored.
I found your work I guess it was kind of an older article about some of the top climbing photographers. I forget which article it was, but I love your work. I feel like it's such a niche type of photography that like people don't really think about until they like see it, like in an REI or on a magazine, or with all of the climbing media these days. It's kind of more popping up in the mainstream, which I think is really cool.
It is. Yeah, when you told me you found the article, I thought to myself, she must have gone down a rabbit hole to find that, because I think that article was from 2014 originally. I think it ran again on their website maybe 2 or 3 years after that. So I'm not. That's probably where you found it, on the like climbing.com.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I actually got curious myself. I said, where'd she find this at? So I just kind of punched in some, search terms on Google, and I found it. And like, oh, okay, I remember that article. It's God, 10, 11 years ago now. But I'm glad you found it. I'm glad it's still out there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, time is flying for sure. So what got you into adventure photography and specifically climbing photography?
Uh, well, I've been a climber for almost 30 years now. It'll be 30 years next year. Yeah, I discovered climbing back in the mid 90s. I think 96
Oh
is when
wow.
I discovered it. I was living in Southeast Wyoming, is where it all started for me. Uh, so yeah, I started climbing back then, and uh, you know, someone always had a camera along. It seemed like, we're always just taking photos of people, and uh, at some point, I think it was around 2009, I want to say, 15 years ago now. I started getting more interested in it, the photography aspect. Because when you're out, climbing, you're usually in these incredible locations, and you'll think, oh man, this would make an amazing photo. So I always had that in the back of my head. If I ever come back to this area or this climb, I want to shoot some photos. So I kind of remember the defining moment for me. I was photographing some friends in El Dorado Canyon, which is, just outside Boulder, which is a place I climb, quite a bit. And I went to a lot of trouble. Sometimes getting a good shot takes a lot of, work just to get to that right spot where you can get a good angle. So I get up there. It took probably an hour to get set up, and I kind of rappel down into a good location. And at the time, all I had was this little, like, point and shoot, nothing special. And I thought to myself, okay, this is stupid. All this trouble I went to, and all I have is this little camera that's not going to take the greatest photo. So I think it was probably early 2010s when I decided to, invest in a nice DSLR camera, and kind of diving into that. And that's when it all started right there, I think.
Wow, that's amazing. How did your climbing kind of carry over into getting those types of shots that you want? Because there's a bunch of different types of climbing, obviously. So like, can you kind of like describe the difference between bouldering versus big wall, and like I saw that you do some competition photography as well. Like what are the difference in those and how you approach them when you come out with a camera?
Yeah, I mean, when I got into climbing, climbing gyms really weren't I mean, there were climbing gyms back in the, mid 90s, but uh, the only time people went to the climbing gym is if it was raining or it was cold. I mean, there was a small little cult of people, went in to train, but compared to nowadays, I mean, climbing gyms are like huge. And so I was always when I first got into climbing, I was more into like traditional climbing, they call it, where you're multi-pitch climbing, you're placing gear on lead to protect yourself, in case you fall. Uh, so I always really enjoyed that aspect of climbing. Uh, just getting out with a friend and getting away from everybody, the adventure aspect of it. The farther away we could get, the better. It was just me and my buddy, and we'd go have an adventure. So, and I think it's a lot different today. Like most people's first introduction to climbing is in the climbing gym. So, I mean, back when I got into it, I had a mentor. I got really lucky. I met a guy that he'd already been climbing for probably 30 years. And he was a guidebook author. He was very uh, well versed, in climbing, and just he taught me pretty much everything. Took me under his wing, and we're still good friends today. Almost 30 years later. So yeah, I don't do a whole lot of bouldering. If I do, it's inside because it's safer, I think. If you fall, you're going to hit a padded floor. I mean, because every fall in bouldering is a ground fall, basically.
Right.
Obviously they have crash pads, they drag out, I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen that before.
Yeah,
Those
yeah.
stack crash pads. So if you fall, you hit that. But I've had so many friends over the years that have rolled their ankles, and I I just don't. It's not worth it to me. So, but in recent years, I've really gotten more into sport climbing.
Oh,
Uh, I don't know how familiar you are with our all the different disciplines, but sport climbing is pretty safe. You're clipping quick draws into a bolt. You're not relying on placing your own protection. So you can really, I feel like you can really push the limits of your abilities and get like stronger and become a better climber that way. So I've been really focusing on that like the last few years, it seems like.
that's really cool. When you go out outside, do you usually take your camera, or is it kind of you're going to a certain location and that climb is going to be good and possibly you could get good photos, or you're going with a climbing partner that you're like, ah, yeah, no, I think it would be cool, or is it just you take it out and you may or may not use it?
A little bit of both. I mean, I've got this catalog of images in my head or locations that at some point, oh, I need to get back here because I think that'll make a great photo. I mean, there's so much climbing along the Front Range here in Colorado. Uh, so yeah, usually I'm always, calling a friend up and said, hey, what are you up to? Let's get out. And he'll find a partner because I'm kind of like the third wheel, just kind of taking the photos, and they're doing their own thing. So yeah, and sometimes I don't take it out as much as I used to with my camera, but I always have the camera with me. Just never know if you're gonna find a good spot or a cool photo you could take. But majority of it was pre-planned. Like I would
Oh,
so, and there's so many variables. Like the weather. Uh, Maybe your buddy can't find a partner. So it's taken years to to get all these photos that I've wanted. That I've eventually gotten back to, because some of the routes I've climbed. So I always know. Oh, I think this pitch here, particular section of a route, would make a really amazing photo from like a certain angle. And some of the routes I haven't climbed, if they're like, some of my friends are really strong climbers. I could consider myself pretty average climber here in Colorado. I mean, I think there's more climbers here per capita than probably anywhere in the country, I've heard. Maybe Salt Lake City's comparable, but yeah, there's so many like really good climbers around here. Uh, it was pretty easy to find someone to get out with because everyone likes to have a photo taken, of them
Right.
climbing. So that was never a problem.
What has been like your most difficult like experience taking photos while climbing? Like what is there a specific memory that you can recall, or like a specific shot that you're like, oh yeah, that one was like really hard.
Mm, typically, it's just the setup. I think maybe the one that comes to mind was up at Mount Everest. It's up in the mountains. We were like 13,000 feet up on this area called the Black Wall. It's considered an alpine wall setting because it's at a higher elevation. So just hiking. It's not a bad hike to get over, but once you get on top, you have to like find an anchor so you can attach your rope to it because that's kind of how I get down into the area I want to shoot the photo. So I remember one. This is years ago. Got everything set up. Had over 100 meters of static line. So I'd rappel down into that, and I'd have my camera with me. And typically, if you're in that environment at 13,000 feet, you're dealing with weather. A thunderstorm could roll in, so you got to take some gear with you. Like a wind shell, a rain shell, stuff like that. A little bit of food. Sometimes I take a thermos of coffee. So you can get weighted down. So I remember rappelling in, and this wall is kind of famous for like a lot of runoff water from the top.
Oh.
So I remember I was rappelling down, and I had to go through this little waterfall. I mean, it wasn't huge, but I don't want to get wet. I don't want my equipment to get wet. So, and there was no way around it. So I just had to go through it as fast as I could, get out of it. So that's the one memory I remember going through that. It was a lot of work, but I got some great shots. Some of them got published, so it all turned out good.
So to get these photos, most of the time, or all of the time, you rappel down. You never climb up, or kind of like move the gear up. If you're doing a really big wall face, is do you always rappel?
Uh, typically like a big wall, something that's like several hundred feet. Uh, I'll get to the top. A lot of times you can just hike. There's like a trail that goes up to the top, and then you'll build an anchor, and attach your rope to it, and then you'll just lower yourself in. But there's some times where I get really good shots just maybe hiking up the other side of a gully to like a vantage point where you're looking like straight over at where the climbers are, and just sit there on the ledge. You're very comfortable, and you can take shots that way. Every situation's different. That's what's kind of interesting about it. Sometimes you don't have to go through a whole lot of work and effort to get a good shot.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And of course, safety is utmost priority. How do you keep yourself safe and the equipment safe while carrying it up or down,
Uh, I think probably the most important thing, I've told people this before that have asked me, how do I want to get into climbing photography. What do I need to know? I think rope work, understanding anchors. Sometimes you have to build your own anchors with your own gear, uh, because that's paramount. Safety is paramount. If you're going to lower yourself in, and you're hundreds of feet up off the ground, you need to know your systems. Uh, and also, you don't want to endanger the climbers below you. Like kick a rock off, because there's loose rock everywhere in that type of environment. Sometimes it's just little pebbles, and that's not a huge deal, but it's possible, if you're coming down and your feet are, hitting the rock as you're kind of rappelling, you could kick a huge rock down on somebody. So you got to be really mindful of that. Plus your own safety. I typically have a helmet on because sometimes you're moving around as you're hanging from the rope, and your rope could actually drag across the rock, and you could actually dislodge something that way. So that's something to think about too.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's like little, I feel like little extra steps, especially when you're like carrying camera gear and stuff that you kind of, you have to think about. It's like, okay, there's me and the other climber, but then also there's all this other gear that I'm also hauling that I have to think about as well.
Right.
How much weight does that add? I mean, do you bring a lot up there, or is it kind of more just the camera, very very minimal?
I try to go pretty minimal. I think in the beginning, you probably overdo it. Like, I have like a padded a bag it kind of works like a fanny pack in a way, but also has a strap you can carry it, like a purse or something. And then I'll tether it to my harness, as a backup in case like the strap were to break or something. Just kind of, a little bit of redundancy there. But, over the years, as I've done it more, I kind of know my systems pretty well. I could almost take one lens with me now,
Oh
and,
wow.
and I can cover quite a bit with that one lens. I don't know if it's I've just gotten lazy or, but the less the better.
Right.
I just but typically I like to have two lenses. Like kind of a wider angle if I'm really close, and then something more of a medium telephoto lens. And that pretty much covers everything. It seems like for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are there? Do you so obviously you're from Colorado and most of your climbing is in Colorado, but has there been any like really unique climbs that you've done elsewhere that you've captured photos or just fun climbs that you've done yourself?
I mean, most of my photography is here in Colorado. I mean, I've done a little bit like out in Utah, in Moab area, and that. Some up in Wyoming. Actually, some out in California in Yosemite National Park. Not a whole lot. I don't get out there quite as much as I'd like to, but yeah, I just kind of do like a circuit around here. Like Devil's Tower, Wyoming is a cool place to visit. That's such a unique feature. Uh, and like the desert, I love being out in the desert. Just that it's so peaceful and quiet, and that's really enjoyable place just to recharge, and kind of unwind.
Yeah. Obviously there's different types of rocks in these areas. Do you find that, um, rocks in Colorado versus, Utah or California impact the way that you bring the gear or the way that you climb or rappel for these types of photos? Um,
Not so much. I don't really. It's never really a consideration. I don't think for me. I mean, there's so many types of rock like around here. We got sandstone, granite, limestone. Uh, yeah, just Colorado is blessed with so much climbing. You can climb year round in Colorado, literally. Uh, there's some areas that are too hot in the summer to climb, so you have to wait for it to be cold because they're south facing, they get a lot of sun. So you can't go to a place like that in July because you would just bake. Uh, so you can just kind of bounce around throughout the seasons. I mean, there's certain times, January, February, we'll get some really cold weather, and if it's rainy, but yeah, it's pretty incredible place to be a climber out here, with all the variety of climbing, and you can do it pretty much year round, like I said.
Yeah, yeah. I have a lot of friends that climb, and they always talk about Colorado, which being like the mecca for climbing in the U.S. And it's
Yeah,
definitely
it's one of
cool.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of hate for college, especially Boulder, because Boulder's got that reputation for being, people are pretentious and they think, but yeah, the climbing is pretty incredible out here. But I mean, there's other places too that are just equally good. So I don't want to come off, it's like, oh, this is the only place that's good to climb. So
What do you think has been like your most memorable climb to just climb for you? And then the second question is, what's been the most memorable climb where you've taken pictures? Maybe like the most like you climbed with some person that you really wanted to climb with and you finally were able to and you also got their picture. Like are there any stories like that?
yeah, I think my most memorable climb, the one that sticks out, it's probably my first big wall I did. It was actually in Yosemite National Park on El Capitan. It's called the Salafe Wall, which and a lot of people know about now because of Alex Honnold soloed that. I climbed it normal, with ropes and gear, and but I did that probably back in 2008, I think, and took us 3.5 days. I think we were on the wall. Can't remember
Wow.
now. I think maybe we topped out at noon on our fourth day, if I remember correctly. But I mean, big walls are pretty memorable experiences. Something you'll never forget. I've heard people say, big wall climbing is like 80% suffering, 20% fun, which is probably true. But as soon as you get done with it, you're like, oh, that was so cool. Let's do it again, and there's nothing else like it, So yeah. And as far as photographing people, I've photographed a lot of, I haven't photographed any of the really big names that I think mainstream knows about. But I've definitely photographed some of the climbers around here that are, pretty, well known. But I don't know if you're how familiar with a guy named Brad Gobright who died back in 2019. He rose to fame. He was I think he was in like the Real Rock films, the you see that travel around, and at one point in time he had the speed record on the nose of El Capitan. But I met Brad when he was just this 21. I think he was like 20 or 21 years old. Nobody knew who he was, and we started climbing together, and I started photographing him. And he was really talented, pretty bold climber. And it was kind of cool to watch him just kind of rise through the ranks to where he became a household name, really. So yeah, I've got a lot of good memories with him. When he'd bounce around. He'd live in Colorado for a while. He kind of did that dirtbag life thing. He would work long enough just to save up some money, and then he would spend the springs in Yosemite Valley, and then maybe summers in Squamish in British Columbia. He would just kind of do a circuit, around this, West. So, yeah, I've got a lot of great memories with Brad.
Oh, that's so lovely. Do you have any climbers that you wish you could climb with or any that you wish that you could take pictures of
Um, I don't
on
know.
your bucket list?
I don't know. At this point in my life, I don't really have like crushes on climbers like that anymore. Like, sure. I mean, anyone would probably think Alex Honnold. I mean, I think he's a pretty household name. So, but I don't know. I don't really think about stuff like that, I guess.
Yeah, you just kind of go out and do it because you like doing it, and if photos come along, photos happen. If they don't, they don't.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What do you think is like your favorite part of all this? The climbing, the photography, the just getting outside. What is your favorite part of it? Why do you climb? Why did you care to take photos in the first place?
Uh, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, the adventure. I always, just love the adventure of it, just getting off the beaten path, just you and your friend tied into a rope together. I mean, I've got memories from climbing trips that I'll probably never forget, you know. And I couldn't tell you what I did 2 days ago, but some of these climbing trips I've done are just incredible. And let's see, what did you ask? Why do I like climbing so much? You know, for me, I was actually just thinking about this not too long ago again. When you're climbing, sometimes you're hundreds of feet up off the ground, and there's only a small percentage of the population that does that sort of thing. So it makes it really unique to me, you know. That's one thing I've always kind of considered that's so cool about climbing, Like, the average person, they may walk down the road and they may look up and see something like a cliff or a rock, but I can get up there and I can be on it and explore it. And I've always thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's definitely such a unique experience. It's like, yeah, as you said, not many people get to experience that view and that type of, just being up there. Yeah, it really is a unique
Yeah, the
thing.
views are incredible, obviously.
What
So
what
do you,
what
do you climb?
I climbed a little bit in college. I have a lot of friends who climb, so they pushed me to do it. I don't climb as much anymore, but I do boulder. Not anymore, but every now and then. And if someone wants to go climbing, I can't say no. So, but
Right.
yeah.
So are you in New York City? Like,
I'm in New York City. Yeah, yeah.
okay,
I went to school in Philadelphia, so I was climbing down there. Mostly gym. A lot of it was gym climbing, but got out a couple times.
okay, cool. Did you ever climb up the gunks, Shawin gunks? I know it's
No,
really
I
cool.
didn't.
I've never climbed in anywhere in around New York, so I know a lot about the Adirondacks and the gunks. Those are pretty legendary places to climb. So maybe one day I'll get up there.
Yeah, take some pictures.
Yeah.
And then like what advice do you have for people who like might want to get into adventure photography? And I see that you do other stuff too besides climbing and photography. And what advice would you give them to start doing this if they're like, oh, that's so cool, I do this extreme sport or something, what's your advice?
Uh, you know, just get a camera and get out and shoot. Just keep shooting and shooting and shooting, and you'll figure out what works and what doesn't work. Uh, I remember when I first got my like real legit camera. It was a Nikon D90 back in 2010, and I'll admit I probably thought, oh, I've got this fancy DSLR camera now. Everything I take a photo of is going to be awesome, and everyone's going to be after me. They want to publish my work, and I was totally wrong. So I mean, it took a lot of just getting out, taking a lot of bad photos. Sometimes I look back at some of my photos from like the early days, and I'll just shake my head and say, wow, that's pretty bad. And at the time, I thought, oh, that's a cool photo, But it's cool to see the evolution of my photography from early 2010 up to this point. So yeah, just get out and shoot. You don't, like I said, you don't necessarily always have to have all this equipment. Sometimes you can just hike up the trail a little, higher up and find a good vantage point, and you can get. I've got some really cool photos that way. So that's where I think that would be my biggest advice right there is just to get out and shoot as much as you can. That's the
Yeah,
only way you're going to get better.
yeah. Oh, that's
And
great advice.
with digital cameras today, it doesn't matter. You can take a zillion photos. You
Right.
know, it's kind of a a double-edged sword too, compared to like the film days where every time you click the shutter, it's like $1, or whatever it cost back then, back in the day. So,
Right.
but I mean, in this era we live in with digital cameras, the sky's the limit, really.
Yeah. No, that's so true. Just go out and do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, before the thing runs out, two more questions. One is just more of a fun, like, would you rather, kind of pertaining to, climbing and photography, which my question for you would be, would you rather shoot on a really technical climb, but have some, mediocre shots? Or, as you said, maybe, you know, do a really easy climb or even not even climb at all. You're just hiking up, the side next to a climb, but get really great shots. Which one would you prefer?
I think I would take the second one, get the great shots. I don't really care where I'm at or what I have to do to get a good shot. I think that's a big misconception. I thought the same way early on when I started getting into photography that I'm going to have to go to all this work, to get a really good shot, and that's the only way I'm going to get one. And then over the years, I realized, that's you don't have to go through all that, intensive labor, you know. So
Right. Oh, that's interesting. That's like really like helpful to people starting out because yeah, I feel like it
yeah,
is kind of daunting in a way and you're like, "Oh, I have to do, I have to, climb El Capitan and get the best shot ever, when you could just, walk up the side or next to a boulder and, just take
yeah.
it from the ground." Yeah.
And some people might think, oh, it's not legit because I didn't go to a bunch of work. I don't know. I don't buy that. So, but I mean, obviously, if you can get, you know, in there, right on top of the climber, some of the best shots I think are looking straight down on the climber because you can see kind of where they're coming and then where they came from, and as the ground just kind of disappears, and it gives a lot of depth to the image. And typically, they're looking up, and if you get that shot in an area where they're trying really hard, they're gonna, their facial expressions and their eyes, you know you're gonna get some really good shots that way. And that helps a lot too with like a lot of the routes I've photographed over the years I've climbed, so I know where the hard sections are. I know where the crux is. I know where they're going to have to really bear down and go for it. So I'll get myself in that position where I know what's going to happen here when they get to this spot. So that's usually where I'll just, burst off, several frames, and hopefully you got a keeper in there somewhere.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. And then kind of the final question to round this all out is if you could tell your younger self, what advice would you give them pertaining to, climbing and photography and just kind of everything, yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one. uh, I guess the one thing that comes to mind, I feel in some ways I feel like I missed the golden age of like climbing photography, um, because back in the like 70s and 80s, even through the the not I'm not sure, maybe the mid 90s, it was pretty lucrative. You could get a lot of money for a one shot. You can get like $500,
Oh, wow.
and it's not like that anymore because the climbing magazines are dead now. Like
Right.
climbing magazine's gone, rock and ice is gone. So I mean, you still have alpinist
Right.
and you still have gripped up in Canada, which they're doing pretty well, I think. But yeah, the digital age just kind of really, it changed the landscape, I think.
Right.
So I always kind of regretted, I didn't get started much sooner than I did, because back in the film days, you had to know what you were doing. These days, I'm guilty of it too. Like with digital cameras, you can take a bazillion photos, and you're going to probably get a good shot out of all those. So,
Right.
but back in the film days, you didn't know that, and you would race to get your film developed, and you're like, God, I hope that one shot turned out, and I think it did. And these days you take the shot and you look on the back of your camera and you're like, oh, that's okay, but let's try again. So I always kind of regret that. I wish I would have started much sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, your work is amazing either way. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
well, thank you so much for hopping on today and enlightening us about adventure photography and climbing photography specifically. How can people find and look at your work?
Well, my website's robkepley.com. Instagram. I can't remember what my Instagram name is. I think it's Rob_Kepley photography. I think so. I don't even remember. I have to look. Or maybe it's Rob Kepley_photography. Yeah. Try one of those two.
Try one of them.
Yeah. I'm sure if you just search for my name. So
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. It was great. It was great talking with you.
you're welcome. It's good to meet you.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to learn more about my experience as an up-and-coming filmmaker or catch up on more episodes, follow me on Instagram at MELYDE12. This podcast is also available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and spread the word. Thank you guys again, and that's a wrap.